I've heard many people talk about how this episode mirrors many of their same experiences in becoming a brony, and I can certainly understand why. Rejecting an activity because it doesn't sound like something that you'd enjoy, even though your friends keep trying to tell you otherwise. And then reaching a point where you get curious about why others enjoy it so much, until you start to realize just how fun it really is. And then having that inevitable moment when you are starting to like something that you never believed that you could enjoy before.
Almost a year ago, I wanted to review this episode behind a very similar reason on this topic, as well as a personal one at that. It wasn't just an episode I perceived that parallel to. I've seen it as a similarity to being a closet brony as well. Another reason why I wanted to review it was because of how much I was able to relate to Dash's conflict about reading. As a kid, I hated reading books. I never liked spending the time and effort interpreting the pages and envisioning what the book or author was telling me. My parents tried everything to get me into reading, but alas, that never changed, and I remained stubborn and uncooperative. It also didn't help that many ad campaigns involving the virtues of reading was shoved in my face so much, it was nothing but irritating to me. This episode did something rather different on those lines, but I'll save that for last. This episode features two plot threads back to back. The first one deals with Rainbow Dash's Turmoil. She gets sent to the hospital to rest for a few days after a major wing injury. Dash isn't very keen on laying down in one place with very little if not anything to do. With this in mind, Twilight gets the idea to keep Dash occupied by suggesting her to read a book, as she shows her Daring Do and the Quest for the Sapphire Stone. But, as arrogant of a character Dash is, she immediately refuses, implying that books aren't cool and it's not for her. Through an awkward moment, the rest of the main six laugh and respond to her that reading is for every pony. After she is left alone, she finds the first minute completely bored out of her mind. This then leads her to much temptation to read the book.
When Rainbow Dash is finally considering reading the book, the music reminds me of a very similar scene in Neverending Story. Seriously, the next time you are watching this episode, pay close attention to the music just before Rainbow picks up the book. Wouldn't surprise me if the music composer got a little inspiration from the music in Neverending Story.
Thus we get the secondary plot thread. The book tells an adventure story about an explorer whose wing is damaged and is stranded on an island. She runs into feline predators throughout the jungle and escapes through various obstacles to eventually reaching an ancient artifact as she enters an ancient temple.
We have some rather obvious references to Indiana Jones, but really, some of these traps just go a little over the top. I know they are being played up for comedic effect, and I am glad to see the MLP staff paying homage to adventure serials like Indiana Jones, but they really could have toned down these traps just a bit and still be so enjoyable to watch.
I, for one, loved the scenes the way they were. Especially with the intended audience, it shows that the staff are willing to take risks and entertain the older viewers and not talk down to them by mellowing out any scenes. I also would like to add that while it does make a good reference to Indiana Jones, it also makes a subtle nod to Harry Potter. The book Dash reads, The Quest for the Sapphire Stone, is more of a title reference to the first book of the series, The Philosopher's Stone, or The Sorcerer's Stone if you live in America. And at the end of the episode, the next book Dash reads is The Griffin's Goblet, which is more referred to the fourth book, The Goblet of Fire. Getting back to the episode, Dash is surprisingly entertained by the book she's reading, but while her enjoyment stands out, she feels too embarrassed to tell her friends about her feelings on the book, given how much she rejected it earlier in the episode. As a matter of fact, whenever some pony stepped in the room, she immediately hides it and convinces them to leave. Out of her act of secrecy, this was showing the lines of being a closet brony. This plays a major role through the whole episode, which is why I also perceived it as a parallel to not just becoming a brony. Anyway, the first time she gets secretive on the fact that she enjoys the book is when both Twilight and Fluttershy arrive to play a board game resembling Battleship.
Of course Hasbro is going to be wanting a parody of one of their board games in the show. And it is rather clever that they are playing a Pegasi version of Battleship. Although I do have to wonder why this sort of game would be Rainbow's favorite. There are also a great many moments when Rainbow is being accidentally cute in this episode. Especially when she is trying to get her friends to leave. Out of all the moments in Season 2, I would say that this episode probably has her most adorable moments.
After Dash gets back to reading, Daring Do goes to collect the stone after running into various death traps. She escapes miraculously out of the temple as the trap fills the temple up with volcanic lava. Unfortunately, after escaping, she gets captured by an intimidating and rather creative villain named Ahizoto.
The story of Daring Do also has some surprising bits of history in it. It is interesting to see that the villain Ahuizotl in this story is actually based off of a creature from ancient Aztec legend. Right down to having an extra hand on the end of its tail. It makes for a very intriguing design. Twilight actually put some real thought into which book that she recommended, choosing a character that really fits with Rainbow's personality. Rainbow almost gets to the end of the book when the doctor comes in and tells her that she is well enough to go home. She can't believe how desperate she feels about finishing the last part, but still won't tell anyone what's going on. Even though Rainbow knows that Twilight has a copy of the book at the library, she still thinks it would be a better idea to break into the hospital just to finish the story. It is both impressive and pitiful that Rainbow is willing to go to such lengths just to try and maintain a reputation.
While Dash attempts to break in the hospital and finish the book, she then gets caught accused of stealing an old patient's slippers. This then leads to Dash getting chased down through Ponyville.
It is also interesting to see Rainbow Dash reading about Daring Do coming across many different species of dangerous cats, only to escape by jumping over the much smaller house cat. In a later scene, Rainbow Dash gets surrounded by the doctor and nurses, only to escape by jumping over the much smaller nurse. And during the chase scene around Ponyville, the episode gives us a rather clever bit by having a dog barking throughout the scene, only to have it turn out to be one of the hospital patients.
After Dash gets cornered, she finally comes out of the closet and confesses to everyone that she likes to read and is an egghead. She tells Twilight that she was finishing the last chapter of the book before she was checked out of the hospital. Twilight allows Dash a copy so that she can finish it. Concluding with the Daring Do story, Daring Do was captured and placed on a death contraption in a temple, strapped and surrounded by snakes and spiders while quicksand was filling up the floors and spikes are popping out of the closing walls. Through unlogic physics, she launches a hat towards a lever that deactivates the entire contraption and is set loose. She gets the sapphire stone and escapes as the sun sets behind her.
The lesson seems rather simple by itself. I shouldn't knock something until I've tried it. Most anyone watching this episode can see this lesson coming from a mile away. But the way they put this lesson together in the episode is actually quite well done. They managed to keep the episode interesting by putting in a very good rendition of the story that Rainbow is reading. And at the same time, everything that Rainbow is doing in this episode actually fits with what we know about her character. And considering that she is openly reading another Daring Do book only 2 episodes later, this actually shows us that Rainbow took the lesson to heart.
This finally brings up my topic about reading again. Most media regarding books and how important it is to kids has been slammed in front of them so much, it's nothing but tiresome. In fact, most stories about one's journey into reading have started from being completely illiterate. Regarding this episode, Dash knows how to read. It's just her pride that gets in the way. So instead of completely shoving the same message down their throats, this episode changes the dynamic and uses it as a plot device to possibly convince the viewer since it's on the side plot. Not just that, but add an adventure story with Daring Do to make it more convincing. You could have replaced the book with a Game Boy or a Rubik's Cube and still established the same moral of the episode, but instead, Cindy Morrow took the risk of adding reading in this topic. The other spectrum about reading is the reputation of someone about it as shown by Dash's attitude. Statistically speaking, many kids out there also hate reading partially because they don't find it as interesting or would rather be online for a round of Call of Duty or Halo. If I saw this as a kid, chances are I might have been more interested in reading than what I originally thought I had.
I, for one, thoroughly enjoyed this episode. Even though the focus is almost exclusively on Rainbow Dash and Daring Do, the story is quite effective at drawing you in. It is simple enough for children to understand, but still has quite a few references and subtleties that only adults would pick up on. And while the message is easy to see even early on in the episode, it still feels different from anything that we've seen before. This is yet another great entry from Cindy Morrow in Season 2, and it still gets better every time I watch it.
I, for one, love this episode upon the same reasons and my personal reasons. Having 2 plot threads intertwined is not easy to pull off, and I'm glad to see that it was put to good use. It's also an episode that differentiates from Dash's ego. It is true that it is present, but the moral is different, whereas other episodes that center on Dash involve the same lesson of not being so egocentric.
Well, this has been quite an intriguing review. Thank you kindly for dropping by, GoldenFox. It's always good to have some added perspective on these episode reviews.
It's been a pleasure discussing this episode and sharing our viewpoints to one another. Until next time, this is GoldenFox, and I thank you all for listening. And thank you, DRWolf, for having me.
You are most welcome, sir. In the meantime, we would like to hear your thoughts about Read It and Weep. What about this episode stands out the most for you? Does Rainbow's journey sound similar to your own? Do you think the lesson presented here feels different from anything you've seen before? We would like to hear your thoughts about Read It and Weep, and here's to hoping that we get some more interesting adventure stories from MLP in the future. I am DRWolf, and I look forward to hearing from you.